Hey, this is Khan, you're watching Ninja Pulls, and the Elder Scrolls Online is about to change big time. Matt Firor, the studio director at ZeniMax Online Studios, just released his annual letter to the community. If you've read these in previous years, they're always interesting, but don't generally contain any explosive reveals. But I guess for ESO's 10th anniversary, Matt wanted to go big. This year's letter is a doozy, with massive implications for the game and its players in 2025 and on into the future. ESO is moving to a seasonal content model. There'll be new and different types of content instead of the annual chapter formula we've all become used to. They are finally tackling Cyrodiil performance. Combat improvements are coming. Guilds are getting some love and some new tools. Base game zones are getting a visual upgrade. PC players are getting a slick new UI, and it looks like overworld combat might finally become more difficult to bring it in line with the rest of the game. It's quite a lot to take in, but don't worry, we are going to break down all the important points, sift through Matt's words, and try to put them into context. We'll also indulge in a little bit of healthy speculation. What follows is the VOD from when we first read through the letter on stream. Enjoy! Welcome to everyone in the Elder Scrolls Online community. As the year is drawing to a close, I'm going to take some time to walk you through my thoughts on 2024 and look ahead to 2025 and how ESO will be evolving to meet the changing needs of the community. First, a few notes about 2024. I probably say this every year, but 2024's ESO content was among my favourite. I loved the vibe and story of Gold Road, and now that Home Tours is allowing me to see so many other people's homes, I'm seriously considering making Merryvine Estate my main house, although it will take a lot to unseat me from Mornoth Keep. 2024 showed that we are still creating wonderful content for all our players. We ended the year with 2 new companions. I'm currently adventuring with Zereth Var, although I'm early in my journey with him, as well as some fun tweaks to Battlegrounds and much more. I look back on 2024's content and updates and I'm very satisfied with our story, content and systems updates. It was wonderful to spend time with fans in person in April at our Amsterdam 10-year anniversary event, and for team members, sadly I could not make it to attend the German ESO Tavern in July. We had many other smaller regional community events, some for the first time in their territories, sprinkled throughout the year, where fans of the game got to meet one another and share stories about their shared time in Tamriel. And now it is time to look forward, which will comprise most of this end-of-year message. Change is a constant, especially in gaming. The gaming industry changes, player habits change, among other games come and go. In fact, change has been constant since ESO launched in 2014. We have been able to keep up with the times, make hard decisions and big changes when it was time to make them. Looking back on all the changes that have gotten us here, it is pretty clear that we have generally made the right decisions at the right times for our game. And now, we're looking forward to 2025 and how we can change ESO to keep it relevant, awesome and compelling. So far so good. Since 2017, we have released amazing content and systems every year, but always on the same schedule. This annual cadence pushed the team to focus on short deadlines every June, where all types of content, systems, content, zones, etc. had to be completed at the same time and has not left us much time for experimentation or thinking about doing things differently. At the end of last year, we gave a slight heads up that we would be shaking things up. Our lead times are so long that we were already planning for some of these changes back then. And I'm very happy to say that starting in 2025, you'll see new ideas and ways of launching content start rolling out. Turning the page on chapters. We've been incredibly successful with our strong annual chapter releases, starting with Morrowind in 2017 up through Gold Road just 6 months ago. Zone design and quest content is at the core of every Elder Scrolls game, as our annual chapter release model highlighted. We still do lots of story content, but now, looking into 2025, we need to concentrate on different types of content to support all types of ESO players. So we are putting chapter aside, and we'll be focusing on new types of content and a new release philosophy, more on that below. As 2025 will be a transition year for new content, we are going to have new zone-based content launch in 2025, but you'll have to wait until April to hear the specifics about how it is different. Stay tuned. Alright, introducing seasons. Over the course of 2025, we will be moving towards a more seasonal content model and away from launching massive content updates once a year, as we did with chapters. We will be talking much more about this in future, but in 2025 expect to see named seasons of 3 or 6 months duration, with a mix of themed story content, events, store items, dungeons, and more. 2025 will be a mix of old and new as we move the dev team towards creating smaller, bite-sized pieces of content. We will still have some larger items that we've been working on for over a year, which you will see launch as well. Freeing up the dev team from needing to adhere to a strict annual cycle means we will be able to have teams launch content when it is ready throughout the year and not work to a date in June. This will let us focus on a greater variety of content spread over the year. This supports the new seasons model and will enable us to release content, updates, fixes, and systems in a more efficient manner. A new focus on change and experimentation. We've been hearing from you, the community, that we need to experiment more, to shake things up and not be so predictable. The game needs new and different types of content, and for long-standing feedback to be addressed. We've already started on some ideas that will be tested in 2025. These systems and ideas will be clearly marked as experiments in patch notes, and are ideas that may or may not be fleshed out into full game systems. With our new focus on breaking up content into seasons and away from years, it gives us time to do these experiments and changes. Here are some of the ideas that we are working on, some of which you may see on the live servers as tests in 2025 and beyond. Some of these will be tests and some will be improvements based on player feedback. Okay, we need to seriously address Cyrodiil performance. Wow, the hears are deafening. Our ambitious goal is to return it to the concurrency levels we supported in 2014. So, we will be experimenting with a Cyrodiil campaign where all classes will have PvP specific and more performance skills that replace the standard player skills, with the expectation that we can support more players per campaign. Next point, increasing the difficulty of standard overworld combat. Improving the overall feel of combat with animation, effects, and potentially audio work. Experimenting with more zones like Craglorn, though not as large in area or scope, created exclusively for high-end group and soft group content with associated gear chase. Adding and refining tools to make guild recruitment, interaction, and management easier and more logical. We have many more ideas here, and of course, we are listening to you and will be coming up with new ideas based on your feedback. Concentrating on new and returning user experience. Quick pause while I grab a sip of water. It is long past time that we address ESO's new and returning user experience. The game is so large at this point that we need to refine the new user experience. Our goal is to shield new players from being overwhelmed by dozens of content options presented to them on entering the world, and instead give them the essential guidance they need to enjoy the game before opening it up to all possibilities. Additionally, we have many millions of players who return to the game every year after taking months to years off, and it is often confusing to them what they should be doing. We need to address this by making sure that the game's map and other quest informational UI areas clearly show the user where they were when they left, what has been added since then, and where they will find content they will love. Here are just a few of the items planned to improve the new and returning user experience. Some of these will launch in 2025, some afterwards. A new patcher with improved visuals and performance, PC only. Returning to the original Wailing Prison tutorial area for new players. This has already launched, but we will be regularly tweaking it to improve the experience. visually improving base game zones with updated textures and art assets, starting with the starter islands. These should start rolling out in March 2025. Not showing new players prologue quest or chapter quest compass pins, the jury is still out on how Stuga will feel about this. Sprucing up the game's PC UI, which is long overdue for a modern visual upgrade. Other map and UI systems still in design/idea stage to make returning to the game more seamless and get you back into the action quickly. Continuing to tell great stories. With the changes to our content release model, please be assured that we are not abandoning new quest content, but we will do it in different ways than we previously have, as our focus will not be on adding giant new land masses, although we will do that from time to time. Instead, we will use existing zones and areas to tell new stories. Some of these are continuing the stories in existing zones and storylines and bringing back familiar characters. New stories focused on hallmark Elder Scrolls organizations like Dark Brotherhood, Thieves Guild, Fighters Guild, and Mages Guild. Splitting a large zone across multiple updates. We're embarking on these changes to give the development team the space to find a new cadence that can mix new content and systems with addressing feedback, fixing issues, and adding new quests and activities to existing zones and stories. It will not be as regular as the old annual cadence, so expect season launches and new content, systems, and test announcements throughout the year, not necessarily in January as we have done since 2017. Speaking of, to give everyone a heads up, our next big announcement event will be in April 2025 as we introduce our first season. There will be much more in the April announcement, but for that, you'll have to wait. We will still have a content update in March 2025 on PTS as normal in January. I guess that's the Dungeon DLC. And we will give you more information about that sometime early in the new year. You've already heard the news that we will not be doing a 2025 North American community event as we originally planned. This was a difficult decision, but as shown by all the planning and development changes listed here, we need to focus on the game itself for a while this year. That said, we will still see you at local community events in many territories, so stay tuned for announcements and details on those. And finally, my thanks to all of you. Thank you so much for being part of the wonderful community that makes up this amazing online virtual world. As I've said many times before, we would not be here without you. You all have navigated many changes throughout the years and have given us invaluable feedback that has helped steer our decision making since our beta program started in 2013. Have a wonderful holiday and see you in Tamriel. Matt. Okay, that's it. I just want to give a quick disclaimer that although I've been thinking about this for the last 24 hours or so, I do not have any special insight here. Maya, nor does Maya. Just what's available to everyone on the website, which we just looked at. Like I said, Maya and I did get a look at the bullet point version of the letter one day early, but beyond that we've had no unique access or info, just the letter and the fact that we've been playing ESO and running a teaching guild here for many years. So I'll try to offer some context. And we will do a more freeform Q&A when I'm done just recapping. But let's start with the new content model. And let's find Matt's exact words here. Introducing seasons. Over the course of 2025, we'll be moving more towards a seasonal content model and away from massive content updates once a year, as we did with chapters. We'll talk much more about this in the future. I guess that's going to be April. But in 2025, expect to see seasons of 3 or 6 months duration. So 2 to 4 seasons per year, with a mix of themed story content, events, store items, dungeons, and more. Now, the studio already moved away from that year-long adventure format. If you guys remember, Greymoor, the Dark Heart of Skyrim, Elsewhere, the Season of the Dragon, or the Year of the Dragon. Remember that? We had quarterly updates of 2 dungeons, then a zone with a new story, trial, and a new system. Always with the same number of world bosses, delves. Always, you know, it was very formulaic. Then after that, 2 more dungeons in Q3, and then finally a smaller story zone. That's quite a conveyor belt of new releases, with the devs working like crazy to deliver content faster than some players can really keep up. Some of us are years behind on story content, and some players don't even play story stuff or dungeons. And while it was cool to have a unified theme across the whole year, with each update moving the narrative forward one step, that's great from a marketing perspective, we've talked about that before, but it's also a bit of a straitjacket if you are a content designer or a writer. You know, it limits the type of content and updates you can do, and that's why they dropped it a couple of years ago. Also, as far as everyone can tell, they are working on another game, and that's probably somewhat of a factor in all this. To what degree, we can't really say. But yeah, like moving away from the 4 updates a year, all in one theme, this new announcement just feels like the logical next step. So it's maybe not the huge move that it sounds like at first, but so instead of the devs and the players completely focused on one massive update in June, and this player spike that you'd get after the launch of the chapter, and then fading off in the afternoon, in the autumn, and then up until the new year. A seasonal model would be more of a constant drip feed of content. I guess that's part of the idea. Also, if you take a look at the in-game map, that if you want to bring that up, Maya, it's clear that they are eventually going to run out of world. They're already pretty close. There's not that much left for them to cover in terms of the continent of Tamriel. Even if there are enough zones left for a few more years of chapters, they would eventually have no choice but to just populate the remaining empty pockets, and they wouldn't have any freedom to tell the type of stories that they would want. And it would also be a bit of a dismal, predictable experience for us, the players. We were like, well, no prizes for guessing where we're going next. There's literally one place to go. You know, so while it might be a bit of a shock at first to hear there will be no more chapters, the more you think about it, the more it kind of makes sense. If not this year, they would have to do it soon, and the 10th anniversary seems like the right moment. As for the new seasons, it's not at all clear what they will look like, and it's a real tease that they don't say anymore, but I'm going to indulge in a little bit of speculation here. Heavy speculation. Again, this is not based on any insight, anything that Zos have said. I'm just thinking a likely inspiration is Blizzard, and the season systems they have in World of Warcraft and Diablo 4. Also, I can't help but notice that because of Zos's lead times, they would have started work on this not long after the launch of Diablo 4 and the implementation of that season. That could be total coincidence, who knows, but WoW and Diablo are both live service fantasy games that have proved very popular and extremely lucrative. And ESO has, not ESO, I mean MMOs in general, live service games, right? The whole white gear, green gear, blue gear, purple gear, gold gear, that's straight out of WoW. You know, so many little things like that have been popularized and then standardized by Blizzard games. So, you know, it wouldn't be the first time. ESO is obviously very, very different, and Zos is a very different developer. I wouldn't expect exactly the same kind of system, but for example, I wouldn't worry that all of our characters are going to get deleted at the end of each season, so we have to start again. That's some Blizzard bullshit that I can't imagine Zos ever considering. So they also have a very different track record when it comes to grind. With some annoying exceptions, which you're all aware of, ESO's never been a super grindy MMO. And all those guides on how to farm gold or XP, they're kind of useless, if we're honest. Like, you generally get what you need if you just play the damn game and keep up with a few dailies here and there. I think that's always been a pretty unique feather in Zos's cap, and I would be very disappointed to see them change tack on that. So I'm not worried about those things. When it comes to monetization, who knows? Their track record there is a little less clean cut, let's put it that way. But I want to think for a moment what an ESO season might look like. It could take on almost any form, and again, this is wild speculation, we don't know anything. But at a very basic level, you can imagine something like a new world event, a bit like a Dolmen or a Harrowstorm, but it's tied to the theme of that season, and it's able to occur anywhere on the map. So these could be cool, challenging encounters with unique rewards, and once the event is over, they're gone. And you could combine those random events overworld events with a short quest line in the style of holiday events, with repeatable dailies or weeklies, and maybe sync them up with golden pursuits as well. It's easy to imagine that that's what golden pursuits are ultimately going to be for. To give you a very basic example, just off the top of my head, there could be a Mephala themed event where her followers are invading Nirn, Spider-Kith and Spider-Daedra coming through portals or some crazy like locus of Daedric invasion, and where trials, dungeons and PvP that has nothing to do with Mephala or anything like it, but those coffers, those reward coffers you'd get from doing your regular in-game activities, they might drop new collectibles like spider-themed armor, weapons, a spider pet, or a spider mount from Golden Pursuits. You get what I'm saying? Then, when the season is over, those invasions will vanish, all those unique rewards are gone. If you didn't earn them during the event, tough. Again, just off the top of my head, and it's a very, very thin description, but hopefully it's inspiring, getting some neurons cracking off. That would be a meaningful tone shift in the game every few months, which would encourage all players, I think, to dive in and take part in something, but which wouldn't require a whole new zone or a massive library of brand new assets, music, voiceovers, artwork, all of that stuff. It would be much easier to create. And again, just spitballing, but this is the sort of thing ZOS already do for shorter events like the Witches Festival and the New Life Festival. They could easily build on this to create the foundation for a larger, more long-term seasonal release, and who knows where it might go. It's clear from Matt's letter that experimentation is going to be part of the plan, and they'll probably get more ambitious as they go forward, just as they did with the chapters over the years. Imagine, like, go back to Morrowind launching, or Hrothgar before that, or Sinium. Nobody would have predicted that in 2018... Sorry, nobody would have predicted back in 2018 that we would get a zone like Apocrypha one day, or a new Daedric Prince. You know? So, even if it starts small, that doesn't mean it will continue that way. And who knows, they may go big. They may start at 11 and go up from there. I like that Matt addressed the inevitable worry that we're going to have less story or just less content overall. And there's nothing I can say or nothing we can really point to in the letter to dispel those fears except his words of "please be assured." We'll just have to wait and see. Pretty much everything I've got here is very speculative, but I and many of us have been paying attention to ZOS for a long time. I feel like we can extrapolate a little bit based on their track record, you know? And then again, part of what they want to do is shake things up and not be so predictable, to make new and different types of content, and also take the time to address long-standing feedback. Speaking of which, I definitely think we should talk about Cyrodiil. I love the fact that it was just one bullet point in this letter, but it is a huge deal as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not even a PvP main. So, I think everyone's aware that one of the biggest and most constant complaints, I was going to say regular, but constant is the right word. One of the most constant complaints about ESO is the performance, especially in Cyrodiil. And it's not like ZOS have done nothing. They've held various tests and they've tried different things, and it isn't as bad right now as it has been. There have been ups and downs, but fundamentally, I think it's fair to say that nothing's worked over the long term. And let's just find a quick reminder of what Matt is saying. So this is the first bullet point under a new focus on change and experimentation. Quote, "We need to seriously address Cyrodiil performance. Our ambitious goal is to return it to the concurrency levels we supported in 2014. So, population. So we will be experimenting with a Cyrodiil campaign where all classes will have PvP specific and more performant skills that replace the standard player skills, with the expectation that we can support more players per campaign. And I guess what happens next will depend on whether that expectation is met or not." Now, if you're one of those players who, like me, spends most of the time in dungeons and trials, and you might be thinking to yourself, whatever dude, I don't care about Cyrodiil, you need to think again. When ESO was first pitched to the public, a major part of that pitch to gamers was the unique 3-faction open-world PvP with capture points, destructible keeps, a place where anything can happen, right? It's still one of the things that ESO does really well, which you really can't find many other places in gaming. On console, I don't think there's anything like it. The gameplay experience is pretty special, and I think the main drawback for years has been dodgy performance, sometimes the fact that no one is in Cyrodiil, but again, I think that's because of dodgy performance. So you just end up running into the same 4 people who kill you over and over again. So I think this does matter, and the devs are absolutely right to want to focus on it. It is very important to stress that they are not presenting us with a solution. They're not saying, we will fix Zero in 2025. We don't even know when this test is coming, how well it might work, or if it does work at all. And if it does, how they'll implement their findings, you know? But experimenting with PvP-specific skills is a direction I don't think we've seen before. I certainly don't remember them trying anything quite like this. The closest thing would be the no-proc campaigns and stuff like that. And although the aim seems to be about improving performance, that's the priority, it is also interesting from a combat balance perspective. So most of us at some point have moaned about this or that class being overpowered, right? We've all done that. And it is often difficult to fix because a class might be overpowered in PvP, but kind of underpowered in PvE, and no one really plays it. And ZOS keep refusing to separate the two. Now, many of us have wondered out loud why on earth the devs are so committed to keeping PvE and PvP unified all the time, instead of extending the sort of battle spirit idea and having adjustments to tooltips and values depending on which type of content you're in. Now this direction, you know, a PvP, let me find the wording again, PvP specific skills that replace the standard player skills. We don't know whether that's going to be just class or whether that's going to be everything. It sounds like it's going to be everything. But that suggests they might be willing to finally abandon this position if this test goes well. And that could eventually lead to better balance across the board. Again, we'll have to wait and see. And I also want to mention the multi-threading architecture they were working on for ages. I actually was kind of hoping there might be a mention of this in the letter, but clearly they don't have any news on that yet. For those who don't remember, this is something they worked on for ages, and which was supposed to deliver, and I quote, major performance improvements. As I understand it, this was finally finished back in July last year, so 2023, but it didn't work. It didn't work as expected, so they rolled back those changes, and Matt actually posted on the forums saying they would continue tinkering with multi-threading as a way to improve server performance, but they would just let us know when they had a success to report. So we've since heard nothing. It's possible they've abandoned it, possible they're still working on it, but yeah, that was a slight disappointment to me that it's not there. But yeah, if there's nothing to report, why bring it up? Anyway, if that Zero test or any others they have planned will eventually help them fix or meaningfully improve Cyrodiil performance, I think that's a really big deal. I know players who would definitely come back to the ESO or play it a lot more than they currently do if that really happened. So, fingers crossed. What other big stuff is in there? Overworld. Let's talk about that. Increasing the difficulty of ESO's Overworld is again one of the most talked about topics, right? It's always on the forums, people are always mentioning it in Discord or in conversation. In case anyone's not clear why, here's the problem. The monsters you fight in the Overworld or Overland, in quests, delves, public dungeons, they're designed to be super easy, not to challenge the player at all or block progress to new players when they're just trying to complete their first bit of story. And I think we all appreciate this when we're new to the game and we don't really know what we're doing, like I did when I was running around with a sword and board, not realizing that no, that doesn't work like it did in Skyrim. You don't really play DPS that way. I mean, you can, but I had no idea that it was suboptimal. And this can teach us bad habits, right? User experience in the early part of any game is super important in teaching us how to play, and if spamming light attacks gets you through every encounter and your character never seems to die or be in any sort of danger, to our brains, that's like the game is saying to us, well done, you've mastered this, go get him. And that sets you up for a really rude awakening later on when you jump into pledges or trials or something and someone says to you, man, your DPS sucks, let me help you, right? And I think this is a big reason why arguments about DPS can get so freaking hostile, because people feel like the game has told them one thing over and over, and now some asshole is trying to force them to do things their way instead. So that's part of it. The other more obvious problem is that if you're not a new player, like any of us, if you've got a half-decent setup, which is sort of dungeon-ready, trial-ready, then nothing in the overworlds puts any pressure on you at all. It basically turns the game into a clicker, where everything dies in one hit. And when you work your way through an entire storyline, beautifully scripted, acted, with fantastic environments and intrigue, and then you finally get to the dramatic showdown with the big bad at the end, the climax of the story, and the ultimate villain just dies in 3 seconds. That fucking sucks. It kills any sense of immersion, and it makes the storylines feel weightless and disappointing, which is why it constantly comes up as a complaint. ZOS have said before that they understand this completely, but that addressing overworld difficulty was just not a priority. That accessibility is really important when you have people like the press who need to be able to play the game without knowing anything about it, and crucially, that they only had so much room in their development cycle, and overworld difficulty just wasn't gonna make the cut. Now, reading between the lines here, it kind of looks like some of that room may have been freed up. I think that's the case that Matt is making here in his letter. That's what he's saying about their new format, giving them the freedom to address long-standing player feedback. Obviously we don't know, but it seems like a reasonable connection to make. So if you were a little bit mad or sad when you first heard me say, yeah, the devs are abandoning the annual chapter format, maybe this will tip your mood scales back a little bit in the other direction. It certainly gives them the opportunity to do other things that we might in the end care more about than an annual chapter. One thing I'm particularly glad to see is the new systems that we've been getting every year. They are often very cool. Companions, I wasn't bothered by, I'm still not bothered by, but that's been quite a popular one. I think Tales of Tribute is much more of a hit and miss. But Scribing was obviously very cool, but the idea that you have to have a new system every year, it's very obvious that you're just on a hiding to nothing, eventually. There's going to be one year where you cannot come up with anything good, but because you've committed yourself and your player base feels like they must get something, that kind of sucks to have those kind of arbitrary targets and expectations, Anyway, with regard to Overland difficulty, they made it very clear, Matt made it very clear, they're just working on it. It's not confirmed, but it seems like they're definitely going to try. Also, as a dungeon guy, I love my dungeons, that's my favourite thing in ESO. If a more challenging overworld does go ahead, and it goes well, you never know, we might get base game dungeons next. Maybe even some of the older trials, getting them updated, refreshed, a higher difficulty that fits much better with the current power level in the game. Now, that is a big project, so don't get your hopes up. But it would be amazing, right? Outside of PvP, dungeons and trials are the most repeatable content in the game. And they are still very popular, so updating some of the old ones to be a new and fresh challenge, I think that's potentially very exciting and pretty good value in terms of development time, because the content is already there, it's just not interesting. But if you can spruce it up, I'm not saying it's easy, not saying it's quick, but if you can do that, that would have years and years of life left in it, provided they didn't let the power creep go out of control again. Now, very quickly, a few other things. What do we talk about? Combat improvements. There's not much to say here besides speculation, but as someone who's spent 5 years helping players improve their rotations, it genuinely has been that long, it's terrifying, and who's probably explained weaving about 2,000 times, I've always thought it would be very, very cool if they could sync up the on-screen feedback that you get and the animations, and just find a way to tie what's happening on screen to with those button presses, you know? With the button presses that the game wants you to do, but does absolutely nothing to show you that it wants you to do. And make that a little bit more intuitive. I don't know if there's a way to do that, and that's probably not what we're getting, but I would hope that they've at least looked at it. For so many players, a huge part of improving their DPS is learning to ignore the on-screen animations and trust their timing, not the game. Do you know what I mean? It's one of the things I've said hundreds of times when I see someone whose weaving is slow, and I can tell you're watching your character's animations and taking your cue from that. Don't do it. Don't look at your character. Look at the boss. You know? Watch something else, because it's throwing you off. And that is the opposite of good intuitive UX design. Also, an opportunity to get rid of all those weird animations that people don't like puncturing strikes, the Templars, you know, biting jabs, puncturing sweep, and rapid strikes, which I still think looks like a drunkard trying to fight a swarm of bees. These were changed in update 35, so what's that, over 2 years ago. And yeah, I know there are a few people out there who are like, I really dig it. I think the jury's in on this one, and most players really don't like those new animations. So maybe it's an opportunity to revisit those, just saying. What else have we got? We got guilds. They've been talking about guild improvements for about a year now. I actually was expecting some of those updates to come in 2024, because I think Rich Lambert told us about them in January during the pre-reveal. So being part of a guild in ESO, of course, it's not absolutely necessary, but I gotta say, if you want to take trials remotely seriously, or PvP remotely seriously, being part of an organized community of players, it does become pretty fundamental. Like, again, it's not absolutely necessary, and it doesn't even have to be an in-game guild, I guess. It could just be a Discord server, and then you can, you know, you sort of plus up on there and group up that way. But often the two go together, and I think it's fair to say, look at this, the Zeal of Zenithar event, which was all about driving players towards guilds. Clearly Zos realize and recognize a lot of players are just missing the whole guild thing. They don't realize, I mean, how would they know what they're missing out on? So yeah, if that helps drive more players towards guilds and realize how much that unlocks in terms of getting something out of the game and socially, it's a huge deal. The visual upgrade I definitely want to mention, because that actually has me quite excited. This is the base game zones that they're getting a visual refresh. What exactly did he say there? Where have I... Oh, that's... I need to scroll down. Yeah, visually improving base game zones with updated textures and art assets, starting with the Start Islands in March 2025. So we've talked about this a lot at Ninja Balls. It's not something we've predicted or have even realistically expected or hoped for. It's just an idea. You know, every now and again when you're walking through a base game zone with your settings maxed out, someone will stop and go, damn, this game looks incredible. 10 years old. And the engine's quite a lot older than that, but it still looks really, really good. And yeah, the old zones are often beautiful, but let's face it, if you put Glenumbra side by side with High Isle, there's just no comparison. So yeah, these are generally the first areas that new players will see. Starter zones first. And I guess it makes sense that they would then roll out to all the base game zones. There are a lot of them, so it might take them a long time, but I don't really care how long it takes. If they're going to work on that, I think that would be amazing, and it's much less likely that a new player will arrive on Bleak Rock and go, it's kind of cute, but man, this looks dated. So yeah, we're not talking an entire rebuild, new assets and textures, that's it, but still, it could make a big difference. And again, if this goes well, you never know, some of the older content like dungeons and trials might eventually get the same treatment. I'm just gonna paint you a picture, guys. Imagine a visually upgraded Hellra Citadel with rebalanced enemies, so it's a proper challenge again. I know so many players would be delighted by that idea. And then finally, the last point I have here is the UI. And again, we can only really speculate. We were talking about add-ons just before we started. Many PC players use add-ons to completely replace the UI, but frankly, most of them aren't that nice to look at. They're just more functional than the vanilla UI. Even if it's just a visual tweak that makes that smoky, scruffy UI look slick and smooth, you know, like the dark UI add-on, which is like low-key the most valuable add-on in the game. That'd be something, but I would love to see them do a more expansive overhaul, not just a visual refresh. There's gotta be some excellent UX professionals working at ZOS who've just been dying to rip out that old UI and build something cooler, more beautiful, more intuitive. But yeah, those are all the thoughts that I prepared in advance. Let's hear more about what you guys think.